All of the visual effects in Sinners is grounded in reality and photographic reference.
I gotta say, it was 18 takes until we had a take that we liked. My name's Michael Ralla. I'm the visual effects supervisor on Ryan Coogler's Sinners.
I'm James Alexander. I'm the visual effects producer on Ryan Coogler's Sinners. And we're going behind the scenes with Collide.
The moment when we see the Smokestack Twins for the very first time was of high significance for the rest of the film. James has coined this term, it's our footprint in the snow, which goes back to Star Wars and like the AT-AT making a first appearance. Essentially, all of our twin believability rests on that first moment, and we really wanted to cement their on-screen credibility, which meant do it the hard way. So essentially what we ended up doing is we shot Michael twice with a repeatable camera setup called the Techno Dolly. The obvious challenge in that particular moment is that there's a cigarette being handed back and forth. And it's not once, it's not twice, it's 7 times in total. Which gets a little tricky because Ryan being Ryan, we shot that whole setup as a one-er. One continuous take, almost 1.5 minutes. There were no cuts when we're on set in Louisiana in 110 degrees heat in the shade in July 2024 when we shot that. Like, our thinking was, all right, this would be a perfect candidate for a head replacement, but that's what everyone would expect us to do. So let's not do that. Let's try it the other way. I said to James, we're gonna approach this shot in a way so that all our peers think they cannot have done it this way, because it would be batshit crazy to approach it like that. The path of the idiot, essentially. The hard way, but as our DP always put it, we're not here to make each other's life easy, we're here to make a good movie. So we rehearsed extensively. We had a little pole on the car that would indicate where that handover had to happen. And then we used ADR beats together with the sound department, and everyone was a fantastic collaborator on this film. The sound guys basically recorded a pass with Ryan's instructions. And then once we had our take that we liked for one side, which was Michael playing Smoke, they added little beeps the moment when the handovers happened. 1, 2, 3, essentially the first beep would indicate, oh, handover's coming. Second beep, now put the cigarette where that marker is. And third beep was now the other person, in this case the double, needs to grab the cigarette. And then we swapped Michael's position and he swapped wardrobe. Became Stack. The double took his previous spot as Smoke. He was now reacting to the pre-recorded audio, or audio cues rather, trying to basically do the exact same handovers again. And so the two really rehearsed how each handover happened, what the hand positions were, what kind of movement they would do. And that's how it all came together. After that, we took the footage. I gotta say, it was 18 takes until we had a take that we liked, and then another 7 until we got a B-side, as we call it, with the reversed twin rolls to get a matching pass. Then after that, it was around a long time, I would say, like almost 3 months of really elaborate compositing with warping and retiming and CG fingers and CG cigarettes and all sorts of little helpers to bring it all together in IMAX quality so it would hold up a projection on a screen that's about 6 stories tall.
Every single twinning shot in the movie is dependent on Michael B. Jordan's performance, and this one especially so. No twinning shot could be possible at all without Michael B. Jordan's performance of both of those characters. And in this case, not only was he performing as both twins, he was hitting those spatial markers, as Michael explained. He was syncing with his previous performance. And he was doing all of this, lighting his cigarettes with a period correct World War I lighter, getting the drawer on the cigarette, in a heavy woolen suit, in a absolute sweltering conditions, surrounded by a crew and all of the pressure that comes from being on a huge film set. So it was pretty incredible to watch. The fine contact points and the detail between the hands with the cigarette handover. When you're looking at it on a monitor on set, it's a tiny little detail. When you go and you look at it in the IMAX and you're looking at it on a cinema screen that's 6 stories tall, every tiny pixel is very clearly visible to the audience and to ourselves. The time that was necessary for that shot was to be so meticulous and so painstaking about every single small detail of that shot to make sure that the audience never looked at it and went, oh, I can see that that's a pretty good visual effects shot, because it's a shot where people want to look and see, well, how was this done? Or is there anything that's giving the visual effects of it away? And that could never be the case, because this is the introduction of the twins. If the audience believes in these characters in this moment, then they're going to go with the characters for the rest of the story. So that was why it was so important to get it right.
Sinners is a twin movie, and we wanted to make every single twin shot count. It's not about necessarily the amount of twinning, it's just that every single twin appearance is as believable as it could be. And this is the one that really planted or cemented that foundation that we would build everything upon. As I kept saying, our dirty laundry is visible for everyone. Let's clean it up as much as we can. We tried our best. Seems like it was good enough. The surreal montage, as we call it, the shot with a burning roof. A lot of the work that we did on that film actually happened in pre-production, because it's a 3.5 minute continuous shot that it has a lot of complexity across multiple departments. Ryan Coogler's films are always about collaboration between the different department heads and their units. That's essentially one thing that we were trying to help orchestrate. We did around 50 rounds of previs just to figure out how all of this would come together. And that was after reading the script, what he had written on the pages, which was so vibrant and incredible that it, like Autumn always says, it jumps off the page. Autumn's the DP who we worked really closely with. We saw storyboards, we saw some of the wardrobe design that Ruth was developing. We saw the initial build sketches of the juke joint that Hannah Beekler, the production designer, was putting together. And we essentially took all of that info and gave it to our previous team, Barraboom in Los Angeles. They were using real-time technology to iterate really, really fast. Essentially, Autumn drew some concentric circles on those sketches from production designer Hannah. We passed that on, sprinkled the different characters, the ancestors as well as the future generations of Black musicians along that path, and just started figuring out what this could look like. We pushed the camera through, and then we just kept building and building and building. And again, Ryan gave feedback every day, and it got to a point where we even got lighting notes from Autumn on the previs just to get a better idea of what that would look like. Then we took those renders, sent them to composer Ludwig Göransson, and he was starting to compose music to that. When we felt we were ready, we all met on a weekend in an empty soundstage with a floor plan just marked on the floor, and we did a first rehearsal, filmed it on an iPhone, started replacing sections in the previous with those rehearsal beats, and then that went back to Ludwig and went back to Ryan, and they refined it again and again and again, and we met again 2 weeks later, this time in a first build of the juke joint from Hannah's team, and we played it through again, and it was fascinating to see because Ludwig was composing on site, added bars in and took some out and adjusted the music. It was fascinating to see how fluid that process was. Ryan was just conducting this orchestra of his collaborators to play in perfect harmony with each other and deliver a beautiful symphony eventually.
While our visualization blocked out each of the moments, the reveals of the ancestors as we came from Sammy and then moved around the juke, what we weren't including, of course, was the choreography. So once that blocking had been roughly set, when we all got together on the soundstage, we were then able to see how the choreography and how the dancers were moving the characters through the environment. And it also allowed us to understand how the camera had to move through the environment, how it had to move up onto the stage. And we worked with the Steadicam operator to understand what was possible in that regard. And there are a number of digital elements within that scene. You have to look carefully to see it, but the camera actually moves through the piano. So the piano is a CG piano at one moment. And then we also used that visualization and the rehearsal to understand where we would be able to stitch the shot together, because it's more than a 3-minute shot, but we were only able to run for 1.5 minutes max using the IMAX celluloid magazines. So that was another part of the process. From the whole rehearsal, understanding what points we could stitch things together so everything would appear seamless.
Our Steadicam operator, Rennie Jarin, I walked the entire path with him, with my laptop in hand and looking at the previous, and we went through the whole thing, and Ryan was with us the entire time, but focusing on what was happening in front of the camera. What was really important to us is that whenever we had one of those transition moments between the different sections, as we call them, that we would go in and out at the right speed as well as at the right point in time, because everything was in sync to the music. Specific positions within the juke joint and specific things that were happening in front of the camera always had to happen at the exact same time in sync to the music. This was one of the very first times that an IMAX MSM camera, which is a really heavy camera with a really heavy magazine, was flown on a Steadicam. We had to downspool the magazines to like half of the normally 1,000 feet, which left us with 500 feet. And that's just a little bit more than a minute of filming time that we have. So this was going to be a 3.5 minute shot, like continuous 65mm IMAX shot, which is, as per the late David Keeley from IMAX Corporation, probably the longest 65mm IMAX film shot ever committed on film. We had to break it up into those sections because we were running out of film. That's what you're faced with when you're shooting analog film Chris Nolan style. They are very, very hard parameters and restrictions, and you work with them. And that's where the stitch points came from. We just had to always like make one section around a minute long. We incorporated those. The first one is actually going through the piano as we're going like towards there's a drummer, and then we replaced the piano with a CG piano so that it would look like a seamless transition. The next section stitch is a beam, which is a classic transition that everyone's doing. And then we get to the section with the burning roof. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because we've been talking about the roof for a long time and how we would do that. Auden and I were talking about that specifically, and my pitch was like, well, we have a real mill. Let's set the roof on fire. The reaction was like, you're crazy. But then the special effects coordinator, Donnie Dean, said, no problem, I think I can make this happen. They worked their way up from like a 4x4 piece to like 34x34, a structure of burning roof essentially that they built. And then on the last day of principal photography, we replaced the roof with that SFX piece, put the IMAX cameras at the bottom, and the special effects team developed like an air knife that would blow the falling embers away from the lens so it doesn't get covered. We shot a burning roof. It was an amazing end to principal photography. Then we put all of this together, and the edit took its course. And again, Ryan is very adept with visual effects. He knows what we can do. And at some point he was like, you know what? I want to go with the embers through the roof all the way to the stars. That's where he felt the ants. You can really feel the ancestors. And at that point, we had to replace the IMAX element with a CG roof. So it's a full CG takeover, full CG flames and everything. But the reason why I think it looks good is because we had that real reference. We knew exactly what it needed to look like and what had to happen. We just needed to add a camera move, which we couldn't do with the photographed element. The last section we shot outside on location. SFX and production design built the remains of the burnt down juke joint. We added a lot of people, we added a little bit more fire, removed the dolly tracks.
The mantra for the visual effects in Sinners, anything that we needed to create, we needed to base it in reality. We needed to base it in reference from our other heads of department, be that the production design or special effects makeup. And the death of Remick at the end of the movie, our lead vampire, is the perfect case study for that. We knew that Remick's death had several components within it. And spoilers for the movie here, but he's smashed over the head by Sammy and he has a big gaping wound in his head. He's staked through the back by Smoke. The sun is also coming up. And so all of these elements combine to contribute to his ultimate demise. So what we had to do was understand, we'd seen the script page with Ryan, and the script explained that there would be a tornado of fire, which is the final component. And that was really where we started, talking to the other teams, to Donnie Dean, the special effects coordinator, and to Mike Fontaine, who headed up the special effects makeup crew, to understand which elements would come from those departments and how visual effects would supply the sinew to bond all of those together. And we started looking at a timeline of how his death would play out through the sequence, and looking at what elements each department would handle. And special effects makeup created 5 different stages of degradation and death and burnt flesh and decaying skin. And we filmed and scanned and meticulously recorded each of those so we could recreate them digitally and enhance them in ways that wasn't achievable practically in front of the camera. And that's adding all of the bubbling and blistering and bursting and sizzle and smoke and steam to that vampire death, and pull everything together, stitch together that process over the whole sequence. That was also the case for the special effects team as well. Donnie and his team actually built a real life fire tornado that stretched 60 feet tall up into the rafters of a brand new soundstage in New Orleans in a tank of water, so we were able to get reflections within the water as the fire burned. And while that was replaced fully digitally in the final shot, it gave us a perfect real world reference that we could base the visual effects in and make sure that that was staying true to the whole feel of the sequence and of the film.
This goes back to a conversation again that I've had with cinematographer Autumn Durald Akapo. She always felt that we're making shit up in VFX, which is partially true because sometimes we start with an empty screen and we have to fill it with something, and people do what they think is best. One thing to keep in mind, and that I realized over the years of working with visual effects, is just because we can doesn't mean we always should. She had a point. Sometimes we really were just making shit up because there was nothing to match to it. So my request to her was like, look, if you don't want us to make shit up, then we gotta shoot a reference for what it should look like. And even if the reference is not doing the right thing that we need to do, even if we actually end up replacing the whole thing with a CG build, as long as we know what it needs to look like when it's shot through your lenses, in your lighting, then that's all we need to make it believable and realistic. So she was on board with that. The other principle, what I call preservation of creative intent. Ryan and his work and his films are all about collaboration. He casts the people below the line and behind the camera just the same way as he does like everyone in front of the camera. He really wants to have everyone chime in and add the best. There was this one thing that he kept saying was like, the best thing that can possibly happen is when his collaborators start talking about working on our film instead of working on Ryan's film. The analog film, the 65mm that we used on Sinners, captured. I think people can feel and see that when they see the film in theaters. The collaborators were hired to produce the makeup design for Remy's demise. Mike Fontaine did that beautifully. So we wanted to stick to that. Why would we reinvent if he basically has outlined exactly what it needs to look like? And so that's the reason why even for stages that we never shot with a motion picture camera, we scanned them, we used them, and we just animated them and made them move, blister, boil, bubble, or smoke. They were true to what he built. The highest compliment that I got from him was like, man, I'm looking at the visual effects work and it looks like what I did, but I know I can't have done it by myself because it's moving. It is true to his original intent. And the same for the train station. The reason it's half digital with a full CG train, but the reason why it looks seamless is because Hannah guided us on what the pieces that were built digitally need to look like, the same way that she guided the production team or the construction team that built and dressed the real station. Seamlessness is not only about matching lighting and good compositing, it's also about what you put in front of the camera and making sure it's in line with what was originally put in front of the camera instead of like digital doing their own thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why this film looks the way it does.
All of the visual effects in Sinners is grounded in reality and photographic reference. That had to be the case to be true to the analog, tactile, and visceral feel of the film.